Data centers have been around for decades, and the boom in artificial intelligence has created a greater need for them. But not everyone is happy about that expansion. Today, the city of Hamilton is voting on a moratorium that could put a pause on any new potential AI data centers. And if passed, it would be the first of its kind in Canada. So let's get some insight into all of this. For more on that, we've reached Shion Guha in Toronto. He's an assistant professor in the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto, cross-appointed to the Department of Computer Science, and he is the director of the Human-Centered Data Science Lab. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's break down this issue. First, when we look at what's happening in Hamilton, what's behind the growing backlash towards AI data centers?
I think the regular public is just coming to terms with the idea of what a AI data center is and just how much geographical footprint and other potential resources that they promise to consume. And they're seeing that there's this tension between the promised upsides of data centers by the government, as well as the potential downsides in terms of broken promises or environmental concerns and other privacy-related issues.
So can you break that down for us then? What are some of the benefits of these data centers? And then we'll talk about some of the drawbacks.
Absolutely. There's definite business cases to be made for data centers. I think that the government, especially the federal government with the AI for All national federal strategy that they released a few weeks ago, is really banking on AI as a way to boost the Canadian economy. And certainly at the very local level, I think that data centers kind of bring forth a sudden surge of construction and other infrastructure related jobs. And they also promise to employ people locally to manage and run and maintain those data centers. So certainly that those upsides exist.
And let's talk about the drawbacks then, the concerns that people have, which has led to this backlash and this push for a moratorium.
Absolutely. I think we could break the drawbacks down into three broad categories. The first category, which is certainly something that's at the forefront of everyone's mind, is exactly what do these data centers do? I mean, these are gigantic warehouses that have power plants and other water filtration plants usually attached to them. And inside they have all kinds of computing equipment, servers, chips, et cetera. And the federal government is saying that this is part of our national critical infrastructure that we need. But people start asking the questions, well, at what cost? Because data centers need a lot of electricity. And so does this mean that everyone's electricity bills are going to go up? Data centers need a lot of water to cool down the massive amounts of heat that's generated as a result of all of this computing needs. And that water is not potable water. It needs to be filtered and kind of brought back into our ecosystem. So that's another concern that people broadly have in terms of environmental issues. And the third one is that, well, there's a lot of potential privacy-related issues associated with data centers, because at the end of the day, who owns the data that's inside these data centers? Just because a data center is on Canadian land does not necessarily make this sovereign AI. Who owns the data? Does this ever get filtered outside the country? Who has control over these issues? I think people are just struggling with the fact that these seem to be foisted upon the general public, and there's not a lot of necessary mechanisms for appeals or contestability or recourse of any time beyond protesting.
So in terms of what you've said there about who controls that data, of course, we know that the government has tried to lay out this AI sovereignty as a priority as well. So at what point does having a data center within this country, whether it be Hamilton or elsewhere, does that mean that there is some ownership, there's some domestic ownership of the data versus a foreign company using foreign technology then having ownership of Canadian data?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because the answer is quite subtle and nuanced. So yes, a data center may be owned by a Canadian company and it may be on Canadian soil. That's just the building. That just doesn't make AI itself sovereign. The reality is that most frontier AI models and technology are owned by a handful of usually American big tech companies. And these big tech companies have gone on record in the past saying, specifically with respect to Canada, that even though Canadians' data may be stored on Canadian soil, on Canadian servers, if they're owned by these American big tech companies, then if there's an American court that requests access to this data, at the end of the day, the big tech companies, which are American, are going to be beholden to the American courts. They've gone on record saying this multiple times. So I think this is one of the main issues that people are struggling with, that just because something is on our soil doesn't necessarily make any of this sovereign AI.
Now, Shion, I wanted to ask you too, I mean, we've seen in New York, it became the first U.S. state to sort of halt construction on large new data centers. And that was for some of the same reasons that we're seeing in Hamilton, you know, the local community talking about raising power costs, straining water supplies, things that we've discussed here. Do you believe there needs to be a much more robust assessment process or consultation process that needs to be concretely in place before proceeding with the expansion of data centers?
I think you've hit upon the main crux of the matter. Right now, the federal government, as well as provincial and municipal governments, what we're really engaging in is the act of building AI data centers and other infrastructure without having figured out the regulatory issues first. Now, in Canada, we've done a lot of regulatory issues. You know, we've dealt with large-scale national infrastructure projects before. We've built large highways, we've built shipping channels, we've built mines and quarries and oil digging on the ground. So we're no stranger to large-scale infrastructure projects. Why is it that in the case of AI, we're in this mad gold rush to build it first and figure out the regulation later? Regulation, reasonable regulation, protects citizens and provides citizens with feedback mechanisms, consultation processes, recourse, contestability, and appeals pathways to kind of co-create and co-design this. Because at the end of the day, if this is national infrastructure, which I believe that there's a lot of truth in that, then citizens need to have a voice in this. And I think right now there's no voice, there's no regulatory framework, and that's where a lot of these tensions are arising. And as a result, when there are protests, the local governments usually kind of act in a reactionary manner to kind of push back against that and be like, okay, maybe we need to figure it out. We haven't done this before.
Shion, I want to thank you so much for your insights on this. Of course, it's a topic that is a conversation across the country, so we very much appreciate your perspective. That was Shion Guha. He joined us today from Toronto.